In episode 8, do you remember Sakura's grandfather from 2 seasons ago in episode 16? Well, guess what? He's back. So the story begins at the Avalon residence. So here you see Sakura making pancakes in the kitchen for herself, her brother, and her father. So now that the pancakes are all done, what Sakura did is that she took them to the dining room. So after that, what Sakura did next that she went upstairs to both her and Tori's father's bedroom. And there she sees Aiden. That was right after she lets her brother know that breakfast is ready and that he'll be downstairs. So anyway, back with Sakura, who wanted to know what her father was holding in his hand. So she was curious about it. But before he could answer Sakura's question, she wanted to know if it was for her. As a matter of fact, it is, Aiden said. And get this, it's a calendar. And he explains what it was for and who it belonged to and etc. So anyway, Aiden explained to Sakura that this calendar is very, very old. It once belonged to both her and Tori's late mother, Natasha, once upon a time. So Aiden had a thought that Sakura should have the calendar itself, and she looked at it very, very carefully, and she finds it in awe. So the first thing she did was that she thanked her father, and he says, "Well, you're welcome." So before leaving her father and, of course, Tori's father's upstairs bedroom, she says, "Oh, by the way, breakfast is ready, so I suggest you hurry before it gets cold." And so she left both her and Tori's father's room. So before Aiden can head downstairs, he was looking at the picture of Sakura and, of course, her grandfather. So meanwhile, back downstairs in the dining room, everyone was having breakfast. Sakura, her brother Tori, and of course their father Aiden. Well, anyway, Tori was curious about his sister looking at the calendar that once belonged to both his and, of course, Sakura's late mother Natasha once upon a time. So, although being as curious as he could be, Tori wanted to know from her what's that she's holding over there. So Sakura told her brother, "Oh, it's our late mother's calendar." And then Aiden explains that how he found it earlier that morning. Then, long story short, Sakura finds something very interesting. Her brother's birthday was February 29th. And when Tori had learned it from his sister, that's when he explains that every 4 years he has a leap year birthday. He told that to Sakura. Then what Sakura finds interesting also is that her late mother once upon a time once wrote Sakura's birthday in the calendar as well. She was in awe. So anyway, Tori was the first to leave the dining room after he thanked his sister for making breakfast. So then Sakura has her turn to leave as well. So her father says, "Well, have a good day," and so she heads off. Meanwhile, when Sakura arrived at her school, and it's now a quarter after 8 o'clock, and when she arrived at her classroom, the first thing she did was to say good morning to everyone, especially her best friend Madison. Of course, Lee, who was also there, he said good morning to her. So when Sakura went ahead and sat at her desk across the way from Madison, her best friends, that's when Madison made a compliment with her, and I guess she's not kidding when she said that. She said, "Someone looks very happy today." So Sakura says, "Really? Isn't that obvious?" "Well, I say it is," Madison said. So Madison, being as curious as she could be, looks at the calendar that her best friend had when she got it earlier from her father back at her place, and she says, "Wow." Then Sakura explains that her late mother had a calendar like that once upon a time, she said. Now Madison, she wasn't kidding when she said that that calendar's really pretty. And that's when Zachary, who's Chelsea's cousin, said, "I can tell you a thing or two about calendars," he said. Then Zachary continues to explain how the calendars were originated and etc. And that's when looking at him were his cousin Chelsea and of course Nikki. Now speaking of Chelsea, you can tell she's getting really annoyed and so's her best friend Nikki. Then minutes later, Eli shows up, and then Chelsea and Nikki said hello to him, and so did Sakura. So Zachary asked Eli a question. You do know a thing about calendars, do you? Nikki and Chelsea just couldn't believe what they heard. They said, "What?" So Chelsea decides to plead her case to Zachary to say, "You know, I seriously doubt that Eli knows what you're talking about, Zach." So Chelsea wants to know from Eli if he agrees with her. So Eli made a surprise confession to Chelsea to say, "As a matter of fact, I do know what Zach's talking about." So Chelsea and Nikki went, "Hmm?" So anyway, both Zach and Eli had explained their story about calendars and etc. So long story short, after the two boys were finished, that's when Zachary decides to shake Eli's hands and says, I think we're going to get along just fine, he said. And of course, Eli happens to agree with Zachary. And then Sakura wants to know from Lee, is it true what Zachary said about the aliens? So Lee tells her that he's not even sure of it. So meanwhile, at Tori's high school, and let's not forget about Julian, he attends there too. So here you see Tori in the high school's music room. So, as you can see, Tori was looking at the calendar really carefully, and he couldn't help but think to himself, what's so special about that calendar anyway? And then he started having a flashback of his own. So, flashback, we see Tori when he was a child who was having piano lessons with both his and his sister's late mother once upon a time. So, anyway, when Natasha, who was both his and his sister's late mother, finished playing, it's now Tori's turn. So, they both play the piano together. And you can tell that Tori is getting really, really better at it. So, anyway, now that they both have played the piano together, now he remembers that day really clearly. It's that when both his and Sakura's late mother was alive, that's when he had a piano lesson with her. So anyway, back to the present. In the high school's music room, Tori plays the exact same song that his late mother, and let's not forget Sakura's late mother, once taught him. So he played it on the piano in the music room, and he didn't even notice that his best friend Julian was in the exact same room with him. And you could tell that Julian was very fascinated. He was in awe. So when Julian stepped forward to Tori, he says he's never heard anything like it before. And then Tori made a confession with his best friend to say that both his and his sister's late mother had wrote it a long time ago, before she passed away. So anyway, Tori had appreciated his best friend's compliment, and he continued to listen to the piano music, Julian that is, and the piano playing just goes on and on and on, without any interruption whatsoever, but that's about to change. Then moments later, Ruby shows up, and she's in the window of the music room, and she too was fascinated with Tori's piano music talent. And of course, she too was in awe, just as Julian was. So after she comes in to hug Tori, after once again he is going to let slip to Julian to tell him who he really was, and then she looked at Julian and says, "Oh, by the way, the archery captain is looking for you. He needs to see you right away. He needs your help," she said. Then Ruby also says that the archery captain needs to talk to Julian about the competition that's coming up. So Julian, after he heard what Ruby said, he thanked her, and then after that he went off. But before Julian can head off, he told his best friend Tori to see him later. So Tori says, okay. And so after that, Julian heads off. So meanwhile, back at the elementary school, there's Sakura sitting on a fountain, and she again looks at her and Tori's late mother's calendar, and she can tell that she was really fascinated with what her and Tori's late mother had written in it. Then Sakura spotted something else was written on the calendar itself. It's her grandfather's birthday that day. And when she discovered it, she's like, oh my goodness. And that's when she realized that by the time she gets home, she'll have to remind her father, Aiden. So later that afternoon, Sakura had just arrived at the Avalon residence. So by the time she went inside, that's when both her and Tori's father, Aiden, just lets her know that he's in the dining room. And so by the time she went into the dining room, she asked both her and Tori's father to look at the calendar. And that's when he suspected the same thing as Sakura did. It's her grandfather's birthday. And they forgot all about it. So anyway, long story short, after Sakura had confirmed it with both her and her brother's father, Aiden, that's when they decided to have a talk with each other while they're peeling off peas from the pod. So being curious, Sakura wanted to know from Aiden if Natasha had ever gave her father presents once upon a time. Well, Aiden not only said that she did, but instead of buying her father presents once upon a time, she made those presents handmade to be set. Well, Sakura just pleaded her case with her father, and let's not forget Tori's father, that that may be true, but he had once told Sakura once upon a time that Natasha wasn't very good at making crafts on her own. Well, even though Aiden agrees with Sakura and said, well, even so, your grandfather loved those presents that she made for him anyway. So Sakura made a suggestion with her father that her grandfather must be contacted by phone right away. But Aiden said that there's a problem. He's out of town at the moment. The reason? Aiden explained to Sakura that her grandfather's out on a business trip and won't be back until later. So Aiden, even though he said to Sakura that he's not sure where her grandfather went, but Samantha, who's Madison's mother, did say that he's out on the business trip at the moment. Anyway, Aiden made a surprise confession to Sakura that he and her grandfather had not spoken in the last 4 years since Natasha passed away. Well, Sakura, after she learned it from both her and Tori's father, Aiden, about what he had said, and that's when she pleaded her case to say, you know something, this is not right. Then Sakura also pleaded her case to say, though regrettably, if Natasha were alive, she wouldn't allow to have this happening between Aiden and, of course, her grandfather. So Aiden finally agrees to Sakura, it's indeed true. Anyway, in case you're wondering, Sakura's grandfather's birthday is November 1st. So after Sakura had thought about it and then made a suggestion with her father to do the same thing as both her and Tori's late mother did once upon a time, make those handcrafted gifts. And then she remembered, oh yeah, I forgot because she just realized she has only one problem, where to send those presents. So Aiden knows what to do. So to make Sakura feel better, he says that he'll make certain that those presents must be delivered to her grandfather. And so he made her a suggestion. He says, if you hurry, you can get started on those presents right away. And that made Sakura feel better, and so she thanked her father, and of course Tori's father as well. So later that night, long story short, both Sakura and her father got started right away in the living room. So you're probably wondering what was Sakura doing with the sewing kit? Well, she was trying to make a handheld basket that may be small but can handle anything. But according to Sakura, and I guess she wasn't kidding when she said, this is difficult than it looks. Well, Aiden, as supportive as he can be, just encourages Sakura by saying that you can do it. And of course, he isn't kidding. And so, Sakura appreciated every support that she needs. So long story short, despite a minor setback, the time is now it's almost 11 o'clock at night. Aiden's in the kitchen doing dishes. Then suddenly he heard the voice of Sakura saying, I did it! I'm finished! I actually did it! And you can tell she is very overjoyed that she had just made the handcrafted basket for the first time, on her own to be exact. Then Sakura just asked her father a question. What kind of a special way that Natasha would send a present for her father, means Sakura's grandfather. Then Aiden told Sakura, well, the way I figure it, what the present needs is some flowers, a bouquet of them, he said. Then Sakura had a thought in her mind. Flowers, eh? And then, aha, Sakura has an idea. And so she decides to go upstairs to her room. But on the way upstairs, minutes later, her brother shows up to let everyone know that he had just came home. So when Sakura meets up with her brother, she says, listen, I have a favor for you. So what kind of favor that Sakura needs from her brother? She says, listen, about that song you wrote on the piano by our mother a long time ago. Do you really think you could play it for our grandfather? She asked. So after Sakura runs upstairs to her room, her brother wants to know from their father what's going on with her. Well, Aiden says, I need you to play the song for her, he suggested. So after Tori had thought about it, and he says, no wonder I've been playing that song earlier back at school, he said, the same song that Natasha had written long ago. So back with Sakura, now that she's upstairs in her room, she just told Carol what's going on. Well, Carol will be fine, so she told Carol, listen to me. I need some flowers as soon as possible, she said. So anyway, Sakura explained what she needed the flowers for, and it's for her grandfather's birthday. So Carol, after he learned about it, so he says, so, your grandfather has a birthday, huh? So Sakura not only says yes, but she says, you remember what you told me about not transforming a card unless it's necessary? Well, Sakura just told Kiro in her case it is in fact necessary if she should transform a card. So after Kiro thought about what Sakura has said, then Kiro was asked by her what he thought of it, and then with permission of course, she wanted to know if it'll be alright for her to transform a card. So Kiro asked Sakura, you really need these flowers really bad? Desperately? Are you sure? He asked. So Kira says, well, since you're sure about this, I would say go for it. If you can handle that, then you can handle anything, he said. So long story short, that's what Sakura did. She changed her star key into a star staff. Now remember in the last episode, she has 17 star cards so far. So what kind of a card that she needs to transform? Well, the flower card, of course. So that's what she did. She transforms the flower card into a star card. And when the flower card's form appeared, she was raining flowers everywhere. So anyway, after the flower card's form did its job by giving Sakura some flowers that she needs, she went right back into the card. Oh, by the way, the flower star card makes it the 18th star card on Sakura's list. Well, good news, Sakura didn't pass out that time, and then she hears her brother play the piano downstairs in the living room. So sometime later, Samantha, who's Madison's mother, shows up at the Avalon residence. I guess Aiden must have contacted her. I can't say for sure. But she said to Aiden when she arrived, I came as soon as I've heard. So anyway, now that Sakura has the flowers, the song that Tori played on the piano, and of course the handmade basket she's made, well, Samantha wanted to know from Aiden what favor he wants from her. So he says, listen, I wonder if you can get these to Sakura's grandfather right away. Well, Samantha was more than happy to do this favor for Aiden, and of course she told him the good news. She says that Sakura's grandfather will be arriving the very next day. Of course, even better, Samantha then said that Sakura's grandfather will get the presents by then, by the time he arrives. Before Samantha can head off, she made a compliment to say how beautiful the flowers look. And of course, she told Aiden that Sakura must have gone through a lot of trouble to make these presents for her grandfather. And of course, she's not kidding. Then Samantha said to Aiden, "You can rest assured that Sakura's grandfather will get these presents." And of course, Aiden thanks her for it. And so after that, Samantha heads off. So, long story short, after Sakura looks from the window upstairs and made sure that Madison's mother Samantha delivered those presents, the very next morning, Aiden receives a phone call from Sakura's grandfather. So, in the living room, Aiden went ahead and answered the phone. It's Sakura's grandfather, whom he's never met. So, while talking on the phone, Sakura's grandfather wanted to know from Aiden if he could meet with him on the bridge at Penguin Park. And of course, Aiden agrees. So 1 hour later, Aiden, who had left the residence, is now on the bridge at Penguin Park, and he did what Sakura's grandfather said to do and met him there. And so, for the first time in almost 5 years, Aiden is now face to face with Sakura's grandfather, who he's never met. The first thing Aiden did when he arrived is to apologize for keeping him waiting. So, Sakura's grandfather not only forgives Aiden, but he says that he had just arrived as well as Aiden did. And so, what Sakura's grandfather did is that he had allowed Aiden to sit with him, and so Aiden agrees, and he did so. So Sakura's grandfather just told Aiden the good news that Samantha had recently just got a present from his own granddaughter Sakura that was delivered by Samantha the previous night, and he just received it the following morning. So Sakura's grandfather wanted to know from Aiden if he could do a favor for him. He said to tell his granddaughter how much he loved those presents, and as a matter of fact, he was very pleased with them. It made him very happy. Then he says, "Oh, one more thing. I have a present for my granddaughter," meaning Aiden's daughter Sakura, "and you can tell her that it's for her." "Don't worry," Aiden said to Sakura's grandfather. "I'll make sure she gets them, and you can rest assured of that," he said. So after both Aiden and Sakura's grandfather had met for the first time, that's when Aiden heads off. So meanwhile, back at the Avalon residence, after Sakura came home from school, that's when she noticed the two presents from her grandfather on the table in the living room. So by the time that Sakura went in the living room, she didn't even notice that both her father and Tori's father, Aiden, who had just came back after meeting with her grandfather on the bridge at Penguin Park, he says, "I'm so glad that you're home. These are from your grandfather," he said. So Sakura was really surprised and in awe after she learned it from her father that those presents were for her grandfather. Then Aiden says, "Oh, by the way, your grandfather has a message for you. He said to thank you for giving him those birthday presents that he received, and he was very happy." So Sakura must have thought that her grandfather must have been with her father, so she wants to know, did he join up with him? Was he here? "I'm afraid he didn't go with me," Aiden said. Then Ada made a surprise confession to Sakura. He said that earlier that morning while she was at school, he met with her grandfather for the first time in almost 5 years, since Natasha passed away. So Sakura wants to know from Aiden, "I suppose he liked the presents I gave him. Is this correct?" So Aiden, after he learned from Sakura that what she said is true and is indeed correct, even better, he also agrees to let Sakura open up the presents that her grandfather gave her, and so she went and did just that. So after, long story short, after Sakura knew that it's a brand new dress that once belonged to Natasha once upon a time, she wasted no time to go upstairs to try it on in her room. So that's what she did. So after, long story short, Sakura tried on her new dress for the first time, she went back downstairs to join her father in the dining room. And when Aiden looked at Sakura and the brand new dress that she's wearing, you can tell he was very impressed. So anyway, Aiden made a compliment with her to see how beautiful the dress looks. And of course, Sakura happens to agree with him and said, "You know, you're right. It is beautiful," she said. So Aiden smiled at her and he said that he's glad to hear it. And of course, what Sakura did next is that she picked up the picture of both her and Tori's late mother, Natasha, and then she looked at it. And of course, you could say the resemblance is undeniable. So Sakura now has 18 star cards on her list, but there's still a lot to go. So that ends episode 8.